What happens when a judge decides to do something that everyone thinks is impossible, right there in open court? Case dismissed. Not only that, but I want to personally apologize to you on behalf of the city. Those words from Judge Frank Caprio sent shockwaves through the Providence Municipal Court that morning. The plaintiff's lawyer sat frozen, his mouth hanging open, staring at a judge who had just done what no one expected. What happened next would restore an entire community's faith in justice. It was supposed to be just another routine traffic violation hearing. Maria Rodriguez, a 34-year-old single mother from Federal Hill, had been issued a $150 parking ticket for allegedly parking in a handicapped space outside Rhode Island Hospital. She couldn't afford a lawyer, couldn't afford to miss work, but she couldn't afford to pay the fine either. The city prosecutor, Attorney James Mitchell, came prepared with what he thought was a slam-dunk case. He had the photos, the witness statements, the regulations. In his mind, this was easy money for the city. Judge Caprio looked at the file and then at Maria, who was standing nervously at the defendant's table with her hands shaking slightly. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened that day?" Caprio asked with that gentle tone that had made him famous. But what Mitchell didn't know was that Maria had evidence that would change everything. "Your Honor, I was rushing my son to the emergency room. He had fallen off his bike and was bleeding badly. I parked in the closest spot I could find and ran inside with him." Mitchell interrupted immediately, "Your Honor, emergency or not, the law is clear. No parking in handicapped spaces without proper permits." Judge Caprio raised his hand for silence and looked directly at Maria. "Do you have any proof of this emergency room visit?" Maria reached into her purse with trembling hands and pulled out a crumpled hospital bracelet and a discharge paper. "This is from that day, Your Honor. My son needed 12 stitches." Nobody in that courtroom was prepared for what Judge Caprio discovered next. The judge examined the documents carefully, then looked at the timestamp on the parking ticket. His expression slowly changed from neutral to concerned, then to something approaching anger. "Attorney Mitchell," Caprio said, his voice taking on an edge that everyone in the courtroom could hear, "what time does this ticket show?" Mitchell glanced at his papers confidently. 2:47 p.m., Your Honor. "And Mrs. Rodriguez," the judge continued, "what time does this hospital admission record show?" Maria looked at the paper. 2:45 p.m., Your Honor. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Everyone was about to witness something unprecedented. Judge Caprio stood up from his bench, which was something he rarely did during routine hearings. His face had transformed from its usual gentle demeanor to something much more serious. "Attorney Mitchell, are you telling me that the parking enforcement officer issued this ticket at 2:47 p.m. for a car that belonged to a mother who was inside the emergency room with her injured child at 2:45 p.m.? Mitchell began to stutter. "Well, Your Honor, the timing might be." "The timing might be what?" Caprio's voice echoed through the courtroom. 2 minutes. This officer had the compassion to wait exactly 2 minutes before writing a ticket to a mother with a bleeding child. Subscribe now and comment what you think about this case, because what Judge Caprio does next will restore your faith in the justice system. Judge Caprio wasn't finished. He picked up the phone on his bench and made a call that everyone in the courtroom could hear. "Get me Parking Enforcement Supervisor Rodriguez on the line. Now." While they waited, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Mitchell was shuffling through his papers, looking for something, anything, that might help his case. Maria was standing there, tears beginning to form in her eyes, not knowing what was happening. The phone rang. Judge Caprio put it on speaker. "Supervisor Rodriguez, this is Judge Caprio. I have a parking ticket here, number 445-1789, issued on March 15 at 2:47 p.m. outside Rhode Island Hospital. Can you tell me about the circumstances?" "Let me check, Your Honor." "Yes, I see it here. Officer Thompson issued that one. Says it was in a handicapped spot without proper permits. Supervisor, I want you to pull up the hospital security footage from that time and location." "I'll wait." What nobody expected was what the security footage would reveal. After 5 minutes that felt like an eternity, Supervisor Rodriguez came back on the line. Your Honor, I've reviewed the footage. The vehicle in question, well, the woman appears to be carrying a small child covered in blood, running toward the emergency entrance. The parking spot she used was the absolute closest to the entrance. Judge Caprio's voice was steady but filled with controlled emotion. And where was Officer Thompson when this was happening? According to the footage, sir, he was sitting in his vehicle about 50 feet away. He would have seen the entire incident. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Maria was now openly crying, but not from sadness. But Judge Caprio wasn't done delivering justice. The judge looked directly at Attorney Mitchell. Counselor, your client, the City of Providence, employed an officer who watched a mother carry her bleeding child into a hospital and decided the appropriate response was to issue a parking ticket. Mitchell tried to respond, Your Honor, if we make exceptions. Exceptions? Caprio's voice rose for the first time. We're not talking about exceptions to the law. We're talking about basic human decency. Judge Caprio turned to Maria. Mrs. Rodriguez, on behalf of the City of Providence, I want to apologize to you. No mother should have to worry about a parking ticket while her child is receiving emergency medical care. The decision that followed would be talked about for years. This case is dismissed. Furthermore, Judge Caprio continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom, I am ordering the city to refund any towing fees, and I am recommending that Officer Thompson receive additional training on emergency situation protocols. The courtroom erupted in applause. Maria collapsed into her chair, sobbing with relief. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. Mrs. Rodriguez, I also want you to know that your son's medical bills from that day, any portion not covered by insurance, will be covered by the court's hardship fund. Nobody in that room had ever seen anything like what happened next. The entire courtroom stood up in spontaneous applause. Court officers, usually stoic and professional, were clapping. Even the court reporter was wiping away tears. Attorney Mitchell packed up his papers without a word and left the courtroom. He had never been so thoroughly outmaneuvered by simple human compassion. Maria approached the bench, still crying. Your Honor, I don't know how to thank you. Judge Caprio smiled that gentle smile that had made him beloved throughout Providence. Mrs. Rodriguez, you don't need to thank me. This is what justice is supposed to look like. Taking care of our community, especially when they need us most. The impact of this decision went far beyond one parking ticket. Within hours, the video of the hearing had been uploaded to the court's website. Within days, it had millions of views. Comments poured in from around the world praising Judge Caprio's compassion and common sense. But more importantly, the Providence City Council called an emergency session to review parking enforcement policies near hospitals. New guidelines were implemented requiring officers to use discretion in emergency situations. Officer Thompson was reassigned to desk duty pending additional training. Several other officers came forward to report similar incidents where they felt pressured to write tickets regardless of circumstances. The story spread far beyond Providence. National news picked up the story. Judge shows what justice really means, read one headline. When compassion meets the law, read another. Legal scholars began studying the case as an example of judicial discretion used properly. Law schools added it to their curricula as an example of how the law should serve people, not the other way around. But perhaps most importantly, Maria Rodriguez's faith in the system had been restored. Her son, now fully healed, often accompanied her to community events where she would tell people, there are still good people in positions of power. Judge Caprio proved that to me. 6 months later, the ripple effects were still being felt. The Providence Municipal Court had implemented new protocols ensuring that emergency situations were handled with appropriate discretion. Hospital parking areas received additional signage and emergency contact information for genuine emergencies. Judge Caprio received hundreds of letters from parents, thanking him for showing that the system could work with compassion. He kept every single one. Do you think Judge Caprio made the right decision? Share this video if you believe justice should always include compassion, and subscribe to see more cases where doing the right thing makes all the difference. The case of Maria Rodriguez became more than just a dismissed parking ticket. It became a symbol of what justice could look like when combined with understanding, compassion, and common sense. Judge Frank Caprio had shown that sometimes the most powerful thing a person in authority can do is remember that behind every case is a human being who deserves to be treated with dignity and fairness. In a world where bureaucracy often seems designed to crush individual circumstances under the weight of rigid rules, one judge in Providence had proven that there was still room for humanity in the halls of justice. But the story of Judge Caprio's impact was just beginning. 2 years after the Maria Rodriguez case, the Providence Municipal Court had become a model for courts across the nation. Delegations of judges, court administrators, and legal scholars regularly visited to observe what they called the Caprio method. A judicial approach that balanced strict legal interpretation with compassionate human understanding. Judge Caprio had established what became known as the emergency protocol for municipal courts. When defendants could demonstrate genuine emergency circumstances, officers were required to note these conditions in their reports, and judges were given explicit authority to consider humanitarian factors in their decisions. The transformation was remarkable and measurable. Court statistics showed a 300% increase in public satisfaction with the municipal court system. More importantly, repeat offenders decreased by 45% as people felt the system was treating them fairly and were more likely to comply with court orders and city regulations. Dr. Sarah Chen, a professor of judicial studies at Harvard Law School, spent 6 months studying the Providence court system. Her findings, published in the Harvard Law Review, documented how Judge Caprio's approach had created what she termed restorative municipal justice. Judge Caprio has demonstrated that municipal courts can be places of healing rather than punishment, Dr. Chen wrote. His approach doesn't diminish the law's authority, it enhances it by showing that justice and compassion are not opposing forces. The national attention brought unexpected challenges and opportunities. Television producers began approaching Judge Caprio about creating a reality show based on his courtroom. Initially reluctant, he eventually agreed on the condition that the show would focus on the human stories behind the cases, not sensationalized drama. Caught in Providence became an unexpected hit, not because of conflict and confrontation, but because viewers were hungry to see a system that worked with empathy. The show's popularity led to speaking engagements at law schools, judicial conferences, and community organizations across the country. But Judge Caprio never forgot why he did what he did. In every speech, he would reference the Maria Rodriguez case as the moment that clarified his judicial philosophy. 5 years later, Maria Rodriguez had a different life entirely. The relief from that dismissed parking ticket had been the beginning of a journey that transformed her family's circumstances. The publicity from the case led to job offers, and she eventually found stable employment with good health insurance. Her son, now 8 years old, had healed completely from his childhood accident. Maria often brought him to community events where Judge Caprio was speaking, and the judge always made time to talk with the boy who had indirectly changed municipal justice in Providence. Judge Caprio didn't just dismiss a ticket, Maria would tell audiences. He showed me that the system could work for people like me. That gave me hope to keep trying, to keep believing that things could get better. The ripple effects extended far beyond individual cases. The Providence City Council had implemented comprehensive reforms to parking enforcement. Officers received training not just in regulations, but in community relations and emergency recognition. The Rodriguez protocols became standard operating procedure. Officers were required to note any emergency circumstances and provide alternative resources when appropriate. Hospital administrators worked with the city to create temporary emergency parking zones clearly marked with contact information for legitimate emergency situations. What had started as one mother's desperate attempt to help her injured child had become a systematic approach to serving the community during crisis moments. Other judges began adopting the Caprio approach. Municipal courts in Boston, Hartford, and Newark implemented similar protocols. The National Association of Municipal Court Judges created a training program based on Judge Caprio's methods, focusing on what they termed human-centered justice. Judge Patricia Williams in Detroit became one of the most vocal advocates for the approach. Judge Caprio showed us that we don't have to choose between upholding the law and treating people with dignity, she said. We can do both, and the law is stronger when we do. The academic community took notice as well. Yale Law School established the Caprio Fellowship, a program that sent law students to work with municipal courts that had adopted compassionate justice protocols. Students learn not just legal procedures, but how to recognize the human circumstances that should influence judicial decision-making. Professor Michael Torres, who directed the fellowship program, noted that students who completed the Caprio Fellowship consistently scored higher on bar exams and were more likely to pursue public service careers. They understand that law isn't an abstract concept, he explained. It's a tool for serving the community. 10 years after the Rodriguez case, Judge Caprio reflected on what had changed. In an interview with the American Bar Association Journal, he was asked whether his approach had made him soft on law enforcement. People ask me if I think I'm too lenient, Judge Caprio responded. But my conviction rates haven't changed. My compliance rates have improved dramatically. When people feel they've been treated fairly, they're more likely to respect the law and the court's decisions. He continued, Maria Rodriguez paid every parking ticket she received after our case was dismissed. Not because she had to, but because she respected a system that had treated her with dignity when she needed it most. The data supported his philosophy. A longitudinal study by the Brennan Center for Justice found that courts implementing Caprio-style protocols saw significant improvements across multiple metrics. Higher rates of voluntary compliance with court orders, reduced recidivism in municipal violations, increased public trust in local government, and decreased costs associated with enforcement and collections. The study's conclusion was clear: compassionate justice is not just morally superior, it's more effective. By 2034, the impact had become undeniable. More than 200 municipal courts across 15 states had implemented some version of the Caprio protocols. Law schools required courses in humanitarian jurisprudence. The American Bar Association had established the Frank Caprio Award for Excellence in Municipal Justice. But perhaps the most telling measure of success was in the communities themselves. Surveys showed that citizens living in areas with Caprio-style municipal courts had higher levels of trust in local government, were more likely to participate in community activities, and reported feeling that their local institutions actually served their needs. The legacy continued to grow. Young lawyers sought positions in municipal courts specifically to practice what they had learned about compassionate justice. Community organizations partnered with courts to provide resources for people facing genuinely difficult circumstances. The Providence Municipal Court, once a dreaded bureaucratic obligation for city residents, had become a model of how government could work with and for the people it served. Maria Rodriguez, now a community advocate, often spoke at legal conferences. Judge Caprio didn't just change my life that day, she would tell audiences of judges, lawyers, and law students. He showed me what justice could look like when it remembers that behind every case number is a human being with a story, with circumstances, with dignity that deserves respect. Her son, now in high school, had decided he wanted to study law. I want to be like Judge Caprio, he would say. I want to help people the way he helped my mom and me. The transformation was complete but ongoing. What had started as one judge's decision to look beyond the letter of the law to its spirit had become a movement that changed how municipal justice operated across America. The idea that courts could be places of problem-solving rather than just punishment had taken root and flourished. Judge Frank Caprio had proven that individual choices by people in positions of authority could create systemic change. By treating one mother with compassion during her worst moment, he had inspired a transformation that improved the lives of countless families facing similar circumstances. The dismissed parking ticket had become a symbol of something much larger: the possibility that justice systems could be both effective and humane, that authority could be exercised with both strength and kindness, and that sometimes the most radical thing a person can do is simply remember that everyone deserves to be treated with basic human dignity. And in courtrooms across America, judges continue to ask themselves the question that Judge Caprio had demonstrated through his actions: what would compassionate justice look like in this situation? The answer, it turned out, made all the difference in the world. Today, the legacy continues to inspire new generations of legal professionals. In law schools across America, students study the Rodriguez case not as an exception to proper judicial conduct, but as an example of what justice looks like when it serves both the law and the people. The case has become required reading in courses on judicial ethics, demonstrating that true judicial authority comes not from rigid rule application, but from the wisdom to apply the law with both firmness and humanity. Judge Caprio, now in his 80s, continues to serve on the bench, still guided by the same principle that shaped his career: behind every case is a human being deserving of dignity and fair treatment.